Over the weekend, Atlanta was plagued by violence in what was called by the mainstream media mostly peaceful protests. Here we go again with the mostly peaceful protests. And these protests in Atlanta all sort of had the same hallmark. During the day, yes, it seemed like there were protests with people with very deep concerns about the police in Atlanta. And then by nightfall, it got very ugly. And it seemed like it was, well, 2020 Black Lives Matter summer all over again, where individuals dressed all in black with equipment they brought to the scene were able to destroy property and burn cars. It's almost like it was Antifa, because it was Antifa, even though our FBI director swears that Antifa doesn't even exist. Well, joining us right now to discuss this is a reporter who covers Antifa like no one else, courageously and truthfully. He's Andy Ngo, editor-at-large at Post Millennial and author of Unmasked. Andy, thanks for joining us. This was, without a doubt, Antifa in Atlanta, was it not?
Yes, it was a coalition, as always, with these violent directions of leftists, Antifa, violent anarchists, and other violent extremists. The description of this by those in the establishment press as mostly peaceful is disturbing in the sense because 6 people have been charged with felonies that include first-degree arson as well as domestic terrorism. So, this doesn't sound like a slip of a tongue to describe it as mostly peaceful or whatever euphemisms they would use. It sounds, as I believe and argue, that it is intentionally deceiving the public about the seriousness of this. The violence, the attack, I would say, in downtown Atlanta took place on the heels of one of their gunman comrades being shot dead in a shootout at their so-called autonomous zone just south of Atlanta a few days prior to that. That is also a serious escalation. You have a territory of city public property that has been seized now for more than a year and a half by militants from all over the United States. 5 out of the 6 who were arrested at the Saturday domestic terrorist attack came from out of state. Earlier in the week, there were a handful of others arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. All of them came from out of state as well. So we have this growing occupation that I would call an act of insurrection, in that it is public property that is seized by militants who declare that this is separate jurisdiction from the United States, and they come armed and ready to kill, as in the case of their so-called martyr. He shot and severely injured a Georgia State Patrol officer who required surgery and is still in recovery in the ICU, by the way.
So, Andy, just in the last 2 minutes, our viewers heard more about what was really behind the violence this past weekend than most viewers who watched hours of coverage on cable news. They all told me that this was an organic community protest against the creation of a new police training facility, what they're referring to as Cop City. That may have been some sort of facade of a fig leaf as to what this was about, but clearly it was about a lot more.
It is. So the militants who are part of this movement, if you will, they call themselves a Stop Cop City or Defenders of the Atlanta Forest. These are euphemisms to sanitize what their real agenda is, which is to subvert the rule of law in the United States, and particularly going after institutions of law enforcement. So this space, which is owned by the city of Atlanta, for years now has already been the funding has been set aside to build a training facility for law enforcement recruits as well as first responders. And those far left extremists have this view that police and prisons must be abolished by any means necessary. And if they cannot do it through the legal process, as they failed in this case, then they will use force.
Yeah.
So they've been putting out a call for more than a year now for comrades all over the United States to come. And in a way, it's actually very similar to the propaganda that IS used 7-8 years ago to put out a call for adherents from all over the world to come. This is sort of their little mini caliphate. It's turned deadly, and there are extremists all over the United States who have held direct actions and other attacks in other cities and vigils in support of the actions of this occupation.
Andy, you're reporting on one of the suspects who is arrested over the weekend. His name is Francis Carroll. Who is Francis Carroll?
Francis Carroll was arrested in December and charged with domestic terrorism at another raid on the autonomous zone in south of Atlanta. He comes from a multimillionaire family in a very wealthy town in Maine, the same town that George W. Bush has made home. I've looked into the backgrounds of those who've been arrested, and there have been a lot. Over and over, we're seeing a certain profile arise, unsurprisingly. These are young, white men and women who come from very educated background. With really, as far as I can find, almost without exception, each one has some type of academic background at some type of elite private liberal arts institution, or they come from well-to-do families. So you can, the parallels over and over we see is very similar to the whole jihadist worldview.
Indeed, this entire center of this latest round of violence was Atlanta, but there were also some copycat protests that turned violent or destructive, at least one in particular in Boston, where there was vandalizing of the Boston Common Bandstand, and one of the people arrested for that is a person named Jared Dowell, who is the transgender daughter of a congresswoman, not even a congresswoman, Catherine Clark, who's the Democrat whip. She's number 2 in the Democrat leadership. Again, an elitist, privileged individual who got caught up or participated in this violence.
Yes, there have been a number of solidarity attacks that have happened over the weekend across the United States. Right after the militant was shot dead, one of the groups representing the movement posted on Twitter calling for retributive violence. And so they indeed did that. They did that in Boston, in Portland, Oakland, as well as other cities. The fact that this criminal suspect, who uses the alias Riley, according to his mother, is involved, I'm not surprised that he's connected to someone so high up in the Democrat Party. We saw several years ago that a son of Senator Tim Kaine was also arrested and charged, and if I remember correctly, convicted for his role in a Antifa violent direct action. So the links between the Democrat Party and Antifa militants are there, and they're there through their family members, which we should look into that, why that happens.
So here's what I don't understand. Because we hear from the FBI director whenever questioned about this that there really is no coordination here, there is no central Antifa, it's just, it's not a real thing, right? And yet, through your reporting, through the videos we see, they're all dressed the same, they're using the same equipment, they're using the same weapons, they're using the same shields, they're using black umbrellas, they're crossing state lines. We see them at airports traveling to the next thing. It sure looks organized, Andy Ngo.
Well, it is, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation sees it that way, which is why they've charged now more than nearly 24 people with domestic terrorism charges. It's, in my view, unfortunate that the federal authorities have not viewed it in that way for whatever reasons. I personally believe that it may be political.
Well, you just laid out connections to pretty high-level Democrat politicians. It seems like those two are related, let's just say. And it certainly deserves some investigation. Sadly, we're just running out of time, though. We're really fast, though. I do want to point people to your book, Unmasked. If you want to support Andy's work, that's a great start. And also your locals page, I have to say, is quite dynamic, too. What's the Andy Ngo locals page again, so people can find it?
Ways to support and follow my work is at andy-ngo.com.
Oh, that's the best way. All right, we'll send everybody there then. andy-ngo.com. Andy, it's always great to talk with you. I wish I had more time, but we're out of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching Salem News Channel. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.